Good afternoon, 12G. Hope you guys have been well. Our topic for today is going to be on pollution. And at the end of this presentation, I'll have a few questions for you guys to answer. And you guys can either email me your answers or you can WhatsApp it to me. All right, so let's get started. All right, so like I said, we're going to be talking about pollution today. All right, so this is basically an overview of this lesson here. We'll talk about land pollution, air pollution, and then we'll talk about water pollution. And if you have the textbook, the science textbook, all of this information can be found on page 45. All right, so what is pollution? I think most of us have a general idea of what pollution is. You know, we kind of associate it with, I guess, an environment not being clean or it being contaminated or dirtied with something. So a definition of pollution is it's the contamination of an environment with a harmful substance. And a pollutant is basically the harmful substance that's going to cause the pollution. All right, so most of us should know, some ideas, well, be able to give some examples of what pollution is. For example, if you look at this picture here, you can see that you have a bunch of smoke that's being pumped from some factory into the atmosphere or into the sky. So that's an example of a pollution because the smoke is basically going to be the harmful substance that's contaminating the air. So that's one type of pollution. Other examples of pollution, you have littering, you have oil spills. That's when, oil is wasted into some type of marine ecosystem like an ocean, for example. So those are a few examples of pollution. All right, the first type of pollution we're going to talk about is going to be land pollution. Uh, when it comes to land pollution, there's going to be two main categories. The first one is shown in this picture here where you see a bunch of, garbage or litter, uh, on the ground. So that's an example of pollution. Even when it comes to, let's see, what do you call those? Landfills. That's a place where all of our garbage is taken to. So when, for example, when you see the garbage truck, coming outside our house to pick up our trash and all of that, they're carrying all this garbage to one place. They're going to carry it to a landfill. Now that is still, a form of pollution, even though, you still need a place to carry all of this garbage, but that's still a form of pollution. Okay, because inside the garbage, you may have harmful substances that might drain down into the soil when it rains, or somehow spread the pollution around to some other environment. Okay, so that's one thing that happens with land pollution. You find that you drop something on the ground, like a plastic bottle, for example, say it rains, that makes its way into the ocean, and now all of a sudden you have the spreading of the pollution from the land to the ocean. Another example is that, let's say you have something like old car batteries or things that have oil in it. Uh, Once it rains, whatever chemicals was inside these trash, they're going to drain down into the soil. That's going to contaminate the soil and whatever else is living inside the soil. So that's going to be a pollution to whatever, insects and different stuff like that live inside the soil. Another thing that can happen is that, sometimes those chemicals can reach, well, basically sink so low into the soil that it's actually going to contaminate the water table. In a situation like that, then whoever drinks the water or use that water, they can get further, well, that's going to cause some type of harm for them. Okay. So with land pollution, those are some of the, I guess, the negative effects that's going to be caused by land pollution. And that's just, the cross contamination aspect, which basically means, the pollutant spreading from the land to the water. For example, with the plastic bottle, making its way into the water, and now that's going to pollute the sea. Or in a scenario where you have harmful chemicals seeping down into the soil and contaminating the soil as well as contaminating the water tables. All right. Another negative impact of land pollution is that you find that whenever a place has a lot of garbage inside of it, it's going to attract a lot of pests, such as roaches, as well as rats. Okay, and animals like rats, they are what you call vectors. A vector is something that's going to spread a disease. Okay, so once you have all this trash and stuff in your surroundings, that's going to attract a lot of roaches and rats that can help to spread disease. Okay, so that's another negative effect of this. Also, let's say if you had some like empty containers and stuff like that inside of the landfill or at the garbage site, that's going to collect water, and then that can be a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So another negative effect of land pollution is that it's going to attract these pests such as cockroaches, rats, and mosquitoes, and these in turn are going to spread disease. So that's another negative effect of land pollution. Another two, I guess, negative effects of land pollution is one, this is actually a fire hazard. Okay, I don't know if you guys ever watch those shows where it show people who hoards a lot or basically collect a lot of stuff. And it basically have a bunch of trash and stuff like that inside their house. Eventually what happens is that, the city may come down and just say, a person can't live here anymore. They have to clean up or they have to move out because that's going to cause a fire hazard. Okay, so when you have a bunch of trash and stuff like that, if a fire was to start, that fire can very easily get out of control. So that's another negative effect of land pollution. And lastly, another negative effect of land pollution is that it's also unsightly. Okay, if you're in a surrounding that has a lot of trash, chances are you're not going to feel comfortable, being around all that trash because garbage and stuff like that is basically, it's unsightly. No one likes to look at, garbage and stuff like that. It basically gives you an uncomfortable feeling. No one wants to be surrounded by trash. Okay, so those are some of the negative effects of land pollution, at least when it comes to littering. Okay, so with this right here, this was the example of littering. That's one type of land pollution. Basically, when you throw garbage on the ground or whenever all this trash is basically collected at one area. All right, moving on. Another type of land pollution is one that you find happening inside agricultural industries like farming. You have some type of chemical pollution, and this is because these farmers, they're going to use pesticides. A pesticide is a chemical substance that basically is going to destroy some type of pest, whether this is an insect. And you also have something called herbicides. Herbicides are going to kill things like weeds. So for example, if you're trying to have a farm that grows corn, obviously you wouldn't want a bunch of weeds and different bush and stuff like that growing around your corn, because that's going to prevent them from growing as fast. It's going to take nutrients out of the soil away from the corn, as well as it might block out some sunlight from the corn plants. And we all know that plants need sunlight in order to make food. It's called photosynthesis. So what farmers have to do is that they have to spray their farm with these different chemicals to kill off these pests and to kill off certain unwanted plants like bushes and weeds and different stuff like that. Okay, now initially I guess that's something desired for the farmer, because obviously they wouldn't want all these pests to be destroying their crops, especially if it's an insect that might be eating, their corn and different stuff like that, because they're trying to make money. But this is also another example of land pollution, because what happens after you spray these plants with chemicals is that whenever it rains again, all those chemicals are once again going to end up inside of the soil, and that from there it can enter the water table, like I said earlier, and that's going to contaminate the water. Okay, so now you once again have a situation where uh, the pollution started on land and then it spread to another environment, such as water. So that's what this picture down here is basically showing. It's showing these different chemicals and pesticides draining into the water and contaminating the water. So now whatever fishes and different stuff like that that was living inside this water, now they're going to be exposed to these chemicals that may have bad effects on them. All right, I don't know if you guys remember when we talked about bioaccumulation that long time ago back in January, but that would be a scenario that might lead to bioaccumulation, but I'll talk more about that as I move on in the presentation. Okay, so yeah, that's one type of I guess negative effect that might happen because of these chemicals. Another thing that could happen is that once you use pesticides or something that's going to kill pests like insects and stuff like that that may be eating the plants, the pesticides basically they're going to kill every single insect. All right, so you have this type of pesticide called an insecticide, which basically means that it's designed to kill insects. Now, you may have good insects on the farm as well as bad insects. The bad insects would be the ones that are trying to eat the corn plants, whether that be the leaves, the roots, or the actual corn. All of that is going to damage the corn. All of that would be bad for the farmer. Now, you also have good insects. An example of that is a bee, okay? Now, a bee is an example of an insect that is a pollinator, okay? Pollinators are good insects because we need pollinators to help plants to reproduce, all right? Bees are actually responsible for creating about 30% of the food that we eat, okay? That's worldwide. Uh, and the way how they do this is because bees are pollinators. They're going to move to the flower of one plant, get the pollen grains from that flower, and then it's going to fly over to another plant and spread those pollen grains. And this is basically how plants are going to reproduce or create more plants. Okay, so without bees, plants won't be able to reproduce, and create more plants. So going back to the pesticide pollution, where you have farmers spraying these pesticides or an insecticide, that is going to kill the bees, okay? And if that kills the bees, that's an effect that you don't want, that a farmer wouldn't want, because the farmer is still going to need that same bee to help to pollinate its farm, okay? So that's another negative impact of using pesticides. And this is why some pesticides are considered a pollutant. Okay, so far with land pollution, we talked about littering. In that case, throwing the trash, plastic bags, cardboard boxes, those were the pollutants. Now, in this scenario here, where you have people using pesticides or chemicals to treat their farm and kill unwanted insects and unwanted plants, the pollutant is going to be the chemicals they're using or the pesticide, all right? And the negative impact we talked about too, when it comes to using pesticides is one, it's going to kill good insects, such as the bee, for example. And it can also contaminate the water. Wherever this is the water table, a water table is basically water that's underground that we're going to use for different things, such as running tap water, drinking water, etc. Okay, so all these chemicals are going to end up inside the water table. Or another thing that can happen is that these pesticides are going to end up inside a pond or inside a river where you have fishes and different ecosystems basically trying to exist. So that's going to contaminate those ecosystems. All right. And like I mentioned earlier, this is going to cause bioaccumulation. Now, some of you might, remember this word when we talked about it a few months back in January, but bioaccumulation, it was basically when a pollutant or some type of chemical was put inside some type of ecosystem. Okay, and remember, as this contaminant or this chemical moves up the food chain, it's going to increase or it's going to be magnified. Okay, so for example, the same farming example I gave you guys. Uh, okay, if you look at this picture here, you'll see that they have a little factory here. Okay, basically, you have some type of pollutant that's being pumped into this river right here. Okay, so at the first level of the food chain, all of those phytoplanktons or the planktons that you find inside the water, planktons are basically it's like a type of algae that's microscopic. They're going to absorb these chemicals. Okay, and then when the next member of the food chain eats those plankton, they're also going to take in even more of these chemicals. Okay, so as you move down the food chain, the amount of chemicals inside or the amount of toxins inside of the inside of these animals are going to increase. Okay, the reason why that happens is because if we look right here where you see zooplankton, let's say one of these zooplanktons eat two of these smaller planktons here. So now they're going to get 2 doses of these toxins or these chemicals. All right, next you have a fish that's going to come behind and eat maybe 3 of these zooplanktons. Okay, now all of the toxin that was inside each of these zooplankton is going to concentrate inside of this fish here. So it's being magnified. The amount of chemicals or toxins, it's increasing as you move down the food chain. The same thing happens here. The salmon is going to eat this herring here. Maybe the salmon ate like 4 of these herons to be filled to get all the food that it needs. And the same thing happens again. All of the toxins that was inside that heron is now going to increase inside of the salmon because he ate a lot of the heron. And then once you get to the killer whale, same thing happens. This killer whale might be eating, this killer whale might be eating hundreds of these herons. And every time he eats a heron, salmon, every time this killer whale eats this salmon, all of the toxins that was inside of the salmon is now going to enter the body of this killer whale. All right. So that's basically what bioaccumulation is. As you move down the food chain, the amount of toxins inside of the animal is going to increase. The main reason why this is happening is because none of these animals have the ability of getting rid of these toxins once it gets inside its body. So the more that it chooses to eat, different animals, if there was some type of pollutant or toxin inside of their ecosystem, that's going to concentrate as you move down this food chain. Okay, so that's what bioaccumulation is. Now, the reason why bioaccumulation is bad is because, once again, these things are pollutants. They're toxic to our body. They're not supposed to be inside our body. So a number of things can happen to an animal, once you have too much chemicals or toxic chemicals getting inside of it. It can cause mutations, like you see in this picture here, where you see this turtle that basically has extra legs. Okay, it can cause mutations such as this, or eventually might get to the point where it kills the animal. Or if we were to become a part of this food chain, because a lot of people eat salmon, once we eat these salmon, the same thing is going to happen to us. All of these toxins are going to enter our body, and then that might cause cancer and different diseases like that. All right, so that's why bioaccumulation is a bad thing. And this is another effect that can happen as a result of land pollution. Okay, so all this goes back to that farmer that would have had pesticides and herbicides. He was spraying his farm with these different things to basically get rid of pests. But what ended up happening is that all of these chemicals and toxins basically entered another ecosystem. In this case, it was a river or a pond, and those animals that was living inside of that ecosystem were contaminated. And then that led to a scenario that caused bioaccumulation, which is when a toxin is going to increase in concentration as it moves down the food chain. It's going to accumulate or magnify. So that's what bioaccumulation is. All right, good. Moving on. So yeah, here's a recap of everything we talked about so far. All right, when it comes to land pollution, you're gonna have two main types of pollution happening. You're gonna have littering or dumping, which is just basically when you throw trash on the ground, and that's going to, that's gonna attract pests, that's gonna attract bacteria, that's gonna cause diseases. Another thing it causes bad smells because obviously you're throwing a bunch of trash in one area. Some of those things, some of that trash might be food, and once food starts to rot, it gets a bad smell. Okay, so all of this is bad because it's increasing the amount of bacteria. Remember, bacteria is a decomposer, which means it's going to eat decaying things. These bacteria can also cause diseases. And like I said before, this is going to attract rats, this is going to attract roaches. If you have containers that have water inside them, that's going to attract mosquitoes. So basically, you're attracting a lot of animals or insects that are going to cause disease. All right, moving on. Like I said, littering and dumping, that can cause a fire hazard. Okay, because you have a bunch of trash in one area. Once a fire starts, that fire is going to be uncontrollable because you have a lot of flammable stuff inside one area. And another negative effect of littering and dumping as as pollution is that these things can contaminate the water and the air. Okay, it can go down into the water tables. A water table is basically the water that's under the ground. Okay, so it can contaminate chemicals and stuff like that can contaminate those water tables. Also, uh, it can also contaminate aquatic ecosystems such as rivers and ponds or the ocean. Because if you have something like plastic, for example, once plastic gets into the water, it's going to keep floating off. It might sink eventually. Other animals might try to eat that plastic, and then that's going to kill them. Okay, and the last point I made on land pollution was that it's unsightly. All right. And next type of land pollution we talked about was pesticides. You have two types of pesticides. You have herbicides. That's basically a chemical that's going to kill plants. You also have insecticides. These are chemicals that are going to kill insects. And like I said, these are chemicals. These are harmful substances because the purpose of having a pesticide in the first place is to kill another insect or a plant. Okay, so once these harmful substances get into a food chain, from it raining and then that rainwater taken into a river or the ocean, these chemicals are now entering a different ecosystem where there are going to be animals. So once these animals take in these chemicals, is once again going to have a harmful effect on them. Okay, so one of the negative impacts of pesticides when it comes to being a pollutant is that it's going to cause bioaccumulation. Okay, another negative impact that we talked about was that these pesticides are going to kill good insects, such as the bee, for example, which is a pollinator. And also, some of these pesticides may also cause different mutations. All right, so that's it for land pollution. Next, we'll talk about air pollution in a second video, because I have covered, a lot so far. But so what we're going to do is that I'm going to put some questions at the end of this video here, and then we'll talk about air pollution in our next video.